talk, so feel free to ask them. And we may keep it till the end, but I'm going to pass it on to Maureen and let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. My name is, my slide is not changing.
Try going out and back in.
Can you hear me, Scott?
Yep.
So my slide deck is not advancing.
Try it one more time. Like go out of it completely and go back in.
Got it.
Perfect.
So thanks, everyone. My name is Maureen Donnelly, and I'm a curriculum development manager at Building Wings. And for those of you who don't know, Building Wings is a curriculum company that supports learners who face complex needs and the adults who endeavor to support and teach them. And so I'm really excited to be here today to kind of talk about, the idea behind the title, Planting Two Flowers with One Seed, is that we have so many opportunities when we support language or AAC use and literacy together to help our kids grow and learn and drive their outcomes. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that sort of conceptual underpinning that we at Building Wings embrace, and then also who are our emergent kids and what are their needs. And then at the end of the talk, I'm going to talk about one curriculum product that really tries to reflect all the things that we know about today's reality in terms of who our kids are, what they need, and how we support them. Just to give you a little bit of a nutshell about me, I've been in this work for, I think, 30 years. I'm an early childhood educator. I've supported kids of diverse learning needs and actually learners of diverse learning needs from preschool all the way to college. And literacy is my passion. It's something I love to talk about. And so just very quickly, Don Johnston is the founder of Building Wings, and he's the man with the vision. And one of the things that, so about 5 or 6 years ago, Don and team developed this incredible product that I can boast about because I wasn't part of the development, but it's called Readtopia, and it's for older kids who are either emergent or beginning readers and writers. And the premise behind Readtopia is that we have this amazing work coming out of the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies at Chapel Hill, so Karen Erickson and team's work. And so we know how to sort of drive outcomes for these kids, but one of the things that was lacking were appealing and engaging materials, and then also age-respectful content. And so Don and team took books from the public domain so that all kids could engage in literature and applied them to the tenets of comprehensive literacy, and built this product that is just going gangbusters in the world and really changing the lives of the teachers and the kids who use them. And so at some point, Don began to sort of see this pain point in the world, which is that, why don't we grab these kids and teachers earlier? Because we know that our kids who use AAC tend to have, pretty lengthy literacy journeys. And Don is just really committed to the ultimate goal of schooling in general, which is to create citizens. And there's very little that we can do as citizens without the ability to read and write. And so that's where I came in, and others like me. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, let's just talk about emergent literacy, sort of who are these kids and what they are, and then how do we support them? And so I feel like this is perhaps one of the two most important slides of this talk, but this is the conceptual underpinning that we embrace. And it comes from the research of David Copenhaver and team. And basically what this says is that all the domains of listening and communicating, reading and writing are mutually reinforcing, and they develop concurrently. And so when you look at this diagram, it's a conceptual diagram, but really the focus is on the arrows. Because what we find is that, the more we read to kids, right, the more we build their knowledge of print and the alphabet. And the more conversations we have with kids, the more we give them that opportunity to listen and build their oral vocabulary. And so any time spent in any one of the 4 domains is really going to drive growth in the other. And so that's sort of the lucky fact, is that we don't have to isolate these things. We can sort of tackle them all at once. And the other lucky fact is that all of the sort of emergent literacy behaviors are fun and engaging things to do. And so we get to do this good, fun work. And so I started talking a little bit about why literacy and AAC at the same time. You know, one of the sort of things I find as both a teacher and a parent is that there are some things that we kind of think about and feel intuitive, but actually aren't the right thing to do. And so it might feel intuitive to wait until a kid has a certain proficiency with their AAC system before engaging them in literacy instruction. But our fearless leader and mentor, Karen Erickson, says no to that. She says that, you know, language and AAC use can be a precursor, but it doesn't have to be. Today, she says that if you are alive, you can benefit from literacy instruction. And the reason that she says that is because the team at the Center for Literacy and Disability Study has supported somebody on a ventilator in becoming a reader and writer. And so really, let's always embrace that conceptual underpinning that says all of these things hang together. They're transactional, they're mutually reinforcing, and they develop concurrently, so we can tackle them all together at once. I just want to take a minute out to say, you know, why wouldn't we approach this from a mastery standpoint? And one of the things, the most important reason I think for me is that it doesn't align with the evidence. It doesn't leverage the opportunities and benefits of that conceptual underpinning I just showed you. But the other thing is that it pretty much ensures that a kid who has any kind of disability is going to get stuck, right? Because the hardest thing that they do is the hardest thing that we ask them to do is demonstrate their knowledge, right? And so what we say as we sort of graduate kids from learning letters to learning sounds is, do they know most of the letters most of the time, right? Because if we get stuck on mastery, we're going to make sure our kids get stuck too. And if only literacy and language were like math, where it would make perfect sense that you master your number identity before you start adding, and you master adding before you start multiplying, right? If only that were true. But here's the thing. Most of our kids, especially those who use AAC, are still emergent learners. And so basically we have decades of evidence that says this approach doesn't work. And so when we talk about emergent literacy, we want to talk about what it is. I want to mention in the slide I uploaded, it said, I put the date 1966, that was a typo, this is 1996. But basically emergent literacy are all the skills and behaviors, actions, understanding, and misunderstandings that precede conventional reading and writing, right? And so the goal is to take these kids who are in this emergent literacy phase and take them to this conventional phase. And so that, you know, somebody who is conventionally literate is able to use the alphabet flexibly and independently across contexts and partners. And that's always our goal. So everything we do. And so if you think about it, for our kids, you know, emergent literacy is the finger plays and the songs and the reading aloud and the looking at books by myself and the playing with the magnet letters and the scrabbling with bath crayons and all of the things that we provide for young kids to help support them. Because when a child comes into the world, we automatically assume he or she will be a reader and writer. Yet when a child with disability comes into the world, a lot of times we have pediatricians and other practitioners who from the beginning say this will never happen. And I think that's a pretty incredible thing to say about somebody who's knowing what we know about brain development, which is that experience is what builds neuronal connections, right? And so it really, I think, you know, I'm a pretty smart person, but I think if a doctor had told me that my kid couldn't read or write, that would really have an impact on the kinds of opportunities and materials and experiences I provided for that child. And so we really want to think about the fact that just by being in the world, we're always learning. And also that emergent literacy is very much about not only the time spent guided and supported by knowledgeable others, but also about the time we spend building our understandings on our own. I like to tell this sort of apocryphal story. I heard this and I just thought it was such a great example of how we talk about emergent literacy. It begins at birth, if not before, and that by being in the world, we're always learning. And so I would like to say even before we're in the world, we might be learning. So Yo-Yo Ma is a famous cellist, and he always had this little song he played to warm up, and he didn't know where he got the song, but he played it every time just warming up. And one day his mother was visiting and she heard him in the studio, and she popped her head in and said, I love that song. I was playing that song when I was pregnant with you, or I was learning that song when I was pregnant with you. And it sort of speaks to the fact that, you know, we're building these brains that have an orientation towards language and literacy and connecting even before we're born. The other thing I like to say about about emergent literacy is that it's relationship driven. So if you think about creating print or using print to create meaning, it's always about discovery and connection, right? Even if we're reading alone, we're connecting to the world or the experiences of something else. And so I like to think that these teaching relationships, parental and teachers' aides and therapists, these are at the heart of any kind of success we're going to have. And one thing we know to be true is that a lot of times in special education, we confuse assessment with instruction, right? They're different things, right? Assessment is tell me what you know, but teaching, but instruction is let's partner together and build knowledge. And so one of the things that I think is really important is to know that, as our kids progress grade by grade, and we may not be having the rate of success, or we might be struggling to know what our kids know, we fall into this paradigm that says teach, test, teach, test. And I know for certain that if I had to show up every day to my job and after the day, my boss would test me on what I did or what I knew or what I learned, I probably would quit my job. And yet we do that to kids on the daily, instead of treating them like the hopeful future readers and writers they might and could be, right? And so research tells us that when we treat kids like future readers and writers, they're the most likely to become them. And so let's sort of take the least dangerous assumption and say, yep, we're going to get there. It's going to take time. It's going to take instruction. It's going to take attention and intention, but we're going to get there. So let's partner today on that premise. The other thing I like to talk about is that Mem Fox is a famous literacy teacher in Australia and also a children's author who's unbelievably prolific, and her books are very darling and engaging. And she says that kids are either relationship disabled or book disabled. So when they're relationship disabled, it means they don't have the trust or connection or intimacy that they need to take risks, because whenever we're learning anything new, that requires that we're vulnerable and we take risks. Or they're book disabled. We haven't found the book that's driving their sort of like global urge to want to read and write. And so sometimes it takes a lot of work, casting about, finding the whale or the backhoe or the whatever the topic is to sort of turn the key. Yikes, here we go. And so the other thing we like to talk about is emergent literacy accrues over time. So for typically developing kids, we say that before a child crosses the threshold of a kindergarten door, it takes 1,000 hours of those songs and finger plays and being read aloud to and spending time with books and scribbling. All of that builds up from birth to age 5 so that a child can read on grade level by 3rd grade, right? And so that's for typically developing kids who have all the access to all the materials and all the books at home and all the parents talking to them and all of that, right? And so for a lot of our kids, they don't have access to those materials. They may not have that belief system around them. And so we have to build that foundation, right? So we might have kids who come to us who might, who haven't had opportunities for 5 different reasons to sort of build that time foundation that leads to that, that sturdy conventional knowledge. And so emergent literacy is the basement, right? And conventional literacy are the 3 floors above. So we're going to start and we're going to build that sturdy basement, building that hour, that play, that time, that intimacy, so that later we can support them in conventional reading and writing. And then this is, I think, the second most important slide of this talk, which is that it depends on experiences rather than age. We tend to think, emergent learners often are little kids, but not always, right? And so I used to work for an AAC company, and I remember talking to a salesperson who found a client who was 40, who didn't yet have an AAC system. And finally, they were able to get the AAC system to this gentleman. And within a period of months, he was reading conventionally. And that really says a lot of things. It says just by being in the world that he was learning. It says that he was struggling to tell others what he knew. And it also speaks to that interrelatedness between language and literacy. And so I really like to think that, the other thing I like to think about is that, if this child, for example, comes into my classroom, I don't know the history he's had, right? He might have been in the resource room for 4 years trying to memorize lists of words on site, right? He might have said, oh my God, they've been trying to get me to do this for years and I can't do it. I'm going to just act out or veg out, right? So we have to also kind of include what we don't know, which is the history of this child who might be having perceptions of failure or struggle. And so when I was an early childhood educator, I worried that I was providing everything they needed to be successful in my classroom. And so one day I kind of came up with this little framework, which I called the ability-disability triangle. And basically what it said is, for my kids who face learning barriers, if I hit the notes of time and access and engagement extra hard, I think I'm gonna be sure that I'm doing right by everybody. And so I'm going to take this framework, this ability-disability triangle, and I'm going to lend it to Readtopia Go, which is the product I'm going to introduce you to at the end, and we're just going to kind of walk it through. And so we talked about emergent learners, who they are, right? They may be young, they may not be, right? They are the people who are before the moment where they can use the alphabet flexibly and independently across contexts and partners. We talked about how we really need to support literacy in terms of and AAC at the same time, not only because this is what the evidence tells us to do, but also because it allows us to develop lots of things at the same time, right? It's sort of bang for our buck. That's where the 2 flowers with 1 seed comes in. And last, I want to talk about the how. And so a handful of years ago, Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver published a book called Comprehensive Literacy for All. And this book is a methods textbook. And it's going to tell you, it's not actually that thick, it's about this thick, but it's going to tell you absolutely everything you need to know about supporting kids who face learning barriers in becoming readers and writers. It's going to tell you how to decide who's an emergent reader and who's a beginning conventional reader. It's going to tell you the routines. It's going to talk about the accommodations. And so one option all of us has is to pick these books up and just go for it and read it and apply what we know into the world. One of the things we did at Building Wings is we took this book and we built a product for emergent readers around this book. And so all of the routines it prescribes are the ones that you'll see in the product, all of the all of the accommodations. And the other thing I want to say is I was lucky enough to cross paths with Karen Erickson when I was in graduate school. Briefly, she was a teacher at the University of New Hampshire, and I was in grad school. And I made a connection with her, lucky me. And I've been I like to say, riding on her coattails for the last 30 years. But and all the good things that have happened in my career have been a result of my connection and learning from Karen. But I think about the fact that one of the things that I think drew Karen to me and me to her is that she thinks about kids with disabilities as kids, right? And we have decades of research that tell us how young children become readers and writers. And so she takes that wide and deep bank of knowledge, and then she applies it to kids who face learning barriers and helps us understand what particular accommodations need to happen, what particular supports they need, and also what philosophical framework. And so I think all of that is super important in thinking about the fact that you could take this Readtopia Go and apply it to a gen ed classroom, because it's kind of, if you went into a high quality first grade classroom, you'd see these things happening. But this book and our product is going to make it so that you can do that and accommodate the kids that you're trying to support. And so I'd like to introduce Readtopia Go. So it's a comprehensive early literacy curriculum for emergent learners pre-K to grades 2 and beyond. And so it's going to provide you with all of the books and the alphabet and phonics activities and the puppet show videos and the instructional guides, instructional supports, and all of the routines that are going to that are going to build that basement, build that sturdy foundation. And there were 3 goals, right? We wanted to provide help you, whether you're a parent, an aide, a teacher, or a therapist. We wanted to sort of help you elevate your practice and align your practice to comprehensive instruction. We wanted to build that basement, right? Help all those emergent learners get that sturdy foundation from which they could pivot later on and become emergent readers and writers, even if the journey takes 50 years, as Erin Shelton says. But we also just really wanted to drive those outcomes. And so Readtopia Go, we're going to sort of talk about what it is and how we got there. We're going to look at it through the lens of that disability triangle. And so one of the things that that we endeavored to do, so if you are a student or if you've read the book Comprehensive Literacy for All, or you've heard Karen Erickson speak in person or on YouTube, one of the things she talks about is the role of repetition with variety. And so one of the things we know is that for any of us, but particularly for our kids who are sort of identified for special education needs, is that we need repetition if we're going to learn something new. You know, when I was an early childhood educator, I had a little bit of a assumption, and I thought it was my job to sort of come in every day and knock their socks off. But we forget that young children actually are always learning all the time, and it's repetition that's actually kind of soothing. But if we only provide them with repetition, then they only learn the things they learn in certain contexts. So that's where we have to introduce variety. So if you look at the wheel on the right-hand side of the screen, that wheel stays the same across all 4 years of Readtopia Go. But beneath that wheel, you'll have two topics. So in the early concepts, the first topic might be alphabet, the second might be numbers, the third might be opposites, the fourth might be patterns, right? And so the early concepts theme will stay the same. What will change below that is the topic. And the idea here is we have this repetition, right? We have these integrated thematic collections, but then we also have variety. And the goal of these wheels, again, we're not approaching this linearly, right? Language and literacy are unmasterable. I'm still learning how to use language. I'm still becoming a better reader and writer to this day, and will continue hopefully for the rest of my life. And as so it is with all of us. And the other thing I want to say about this is that we've organized these collections into sort of these multi-thematic units, because the research tells us that when we teach more than one thing at a time, we get better results. And so the way I like to think about it is, so in the being a scientist theme, the text for that is we're teaching kids literacy. We're walking through all of those emergent literacy routines that are prescribed in Comprehensive Literacy for All. But the subtext is that we're giving them access to the vocabulary and the concepts that are going to help them be access their school life and help them be successful in the world. And so again, I just want to remind everyone that, you know, these things are color coded. So yellow is always social emotional learning. We have science, we have social studies, and we have early concepts. So all of these things kind of go together, and we do them in multi-thematic units. But one of the things that we know to be true, and special educators and early childhood educators know this particularly, is that we read the room, right? We can't rely on behavior. Our kids just don't cooperate at that level. So if you're having an amazing time learning in the All About Me unit, you are absolutely free to sort of stick with it and keep going, and next go into relationships and then dig into grit and resilience if that's how it's working. But if not, you can follow the collection. So you have that flexibility. And so going back to that triangle, we talked about access, time, and engagement. So I thought maybe we would start with access. If you think about it, there's not a whole lot that we can do that when it comes to learning new things that we can actually do until we manipulate the materials that support that learning. So for beginning readers and writers, those kinds of things are, I need access to communication. I need access to the ability, I need access to books, and I need access to turn those pages and to hold that pencil, right? And so I think about, you know, I had an experience where I learned to belay in a rope climbing gym. And so I learned to belay, and then I took my test and I got certified, but then the gym closed. And so I stopped belaying. And I would not be a safe person to belay because I no longer have access to the materials that supported that learning. And so we just have to make sure that we provide that for those kiddos. So let's look at some of the access points we have in Readtopia Go. So the first and most exciting one is that on our website and at the last Lesson Picks website, they've created this core plus fringe communication booklet that is free to download, either on our side or theirs. Obviously, we start with core vocabulary because this is the strategy that's prescribed by the team at the Center for Literacy and Disability Study. And the power of core words, so things like want and go and not and like, is that they're flexible, they're frequent, and they're really functional. And so if you think about 4 words, like, want, not, and go, with just those 4 words, we can talk about so many different things, right? I like it, I not like it, I want to go, I don't want to go, I don't want it, I want it, right? All these words, once you introduce the word not, you've almost got 50% more power. And so we have these core words. The core words is the primary page in the book, but we also have this fringe vocabulary. And the fringe vocabulary is organized not around thematic topics in Readtopia Go, because Readtopia Go is not the thing, right? Communication is the thing. And so you have all of these, we sampled language and built this with the help of Caroline Musselwhite and Karen Erickson, built this sort of fringe vocabulary set that is supportive of Readtopia Go, right? But also supportive for life, because communication is for life. And so, you know, if a child has a system on their own, amen to it. We love that. But absent that, there's no way to meaningfully engage in instruction without a method to communicate. And so we're so proud to tell you that we have this communication booklet as a support, possibly for the kid who doesn't have it, possibly for the day when the device stayed at home or the battery died or it's in the shop. And so that's one exciting thing. The other exciting thing is that we have books on an accessible platform on the website that really only require an arrow to click. And we are in deep process thinking about the role of writing as it supports emergent literacy, and in really thinking deeply about what we can do to sort of support all beginning writers as well. And so that's one of our access elements. Another is that Readtopia Go, because it's an early childhood program, is organized around language and play. And so one of the things we wanted to include were thematically integrated play centers, because we kind of know that, you know, again, any early childhood classroom worth its salt is probably doing some version of that. So we have these 5 themes. They are arts and crafts, movement, pretend play, sensory play, and STEM. And so of those 5, we pick 3 for each of the topics. So if my topic was animal homes, I'm going to pick 3 of those centers and provide a short list of supplies, some basic instructions for executing that center. And then best and most important to me, we work with Dr. Gretchen Hanser, who is very seminal in teaching the rest of us about the role of alternative pencils for beginning writers. And so she reviews our work and provides us with vision, communication, and physical access tips so that we can always make sure that all kids can engage and equally and democratically in the curriculum. And so I feel really excited about the way that Gretchen's work has sort of played out, so that simply teachers have these prompts, the supplies, the instructions, and then the tips, but then also, importantly, ways to include all kiddos. Another element of access that we've included is that we have strong connections to Project Core, Project-Core. Project, if you want to look for it on the website, Project-Core is a 4-year grant that was funded and implemented by the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies, and it provides all sorts of teaching and support for using core in the context of communication and language. And so we link to those, a lot of our teacher supports link to those, so that if you want to take a deeper dive, it wouldn't take much from you. You know, another thing we want to talk about is time. Dawn was extremely passionate about developing Readtopia and Readtopia Go because the research tells us that special educators spend about a workday a week searching for, purchasing, downloading, adapting, and aligning their own curriculum. And God bless them for it, right? That's a lot of time. But also, it's expensive. And then last but not least, it doesn't always result in curriculum that sort of meaningfully integrates from one topic or concept from the next. And so we wanted to sort of like really address all of that. So we're going to save you that time, right? We're going to deliver the whole enchilada, so you have this wide-ranging thematic integration. And then we're also going to provide you with what research tells us is going to get the best outcomes. So 90 minutes of early literacy instruction a day. Now that might sound intimidating, and understandably it can be, because we know that special educators have a lot of things that compete for their time, like the 40 minutes I spent cleaning up my friend in the bathroom, or the fire drill, or the sick days, or the snow days, right? And so we also have a process in place to support you if that sounds like an intimidating amount of time, that's going to support you to begin somewhere and keep going. So I'll talk about that a little bit. So the other thing to think about is that if the 1,000 hours of early literacy related experiences and is what leads to conventional reading and writing. And we know that for typically developing kids, we don't exactly know the number for kids who have learning challenges. But if it were true, that 1,000 hours at 90 minutes a day can be addressed in 2 years. And so I mentioned before that one of my favorite teachers in our space, Erin Sheldon, talks about her daughter's 50-year literacy journey. And I just love that story because it sort of says that, like, it reminds us that Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And a lot of times we're looking for success in terms of like the big boom, but success happens in little and subtle ways. And so I say that, knowing that all that language and listening and reading and writing are all mutually reinforcing, I can't imagine any better time or place for us to spend on instruction than engaging in literacy and communication. And so one of the things that's sort of alive in our space and in the education world generally is the science of reading has come up over and over. The National Early Literacy Panel, as well as the National Reading Panel, talks about the role that alphabet and phonics learning plays in learning to read and write. And a lot of times I think it can get misinterpreted as the only thing that helps us read and write, but it's one of the really significant components. And the recommendation is that we introduce and support this kind of learning in cyclical, systematic, and sequential ways. And so in Readtopia Go and Readtopia, we've done just that. So we have these two levels of learning. The first is learning letters, and the second is learning letters plus. And I'm really proud to say that this is sort of patented. This is sort of a patented alphabet and phonics program that's specifically designed for kids who face learning barriers, and even perhaps more specifically for kids who are AAC users. And there's been more than a decade of evidence that this is highly supportive of these kids. And the important thing about it is that because this is designed for this is supportive of kids who may not be verbal, you don't actually have to change the construct while you teach it, right? A lot of the popular sort of interventionist phonics programs require a speaking child. And so if you're not a speaking child, we have to alter the construct. But here, we actually have a program for those kiddos that's been working for more than a decade. The other thing I want to say is that, Don is committed to staying abreast of the emerging research from the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies. And so one of the things that Karen Erickson's research found was that in our alphabet and phonics approach, we have learning letters and we have making words, but conceptually, it turned out that sometimes kids struggled, that there was a little bit of a gap in knowledge between learning about letters and learning about words. And so as a result, my colleague, Dr. Allison Dennis, based on Karen's research, wrote this new program called Learning Letters Plus that's part of Readtopia and Readtopia Go, that's going to take kids in a sequential, cyclical, and systematic way from learning letters to learning about sounds, to learning about words. And so I'm really excited. This is sort of a hot off the presses, patented building wings kind of packet. And again, it's differentiated at 2 levels. So we can make sure that if you were using Readtopia across 4 years and you were making progress, amen to that there's a place for you to keep going and growing. So one of the things I talked about in the other, or a little bit earlier, is that we know what the 5 emergent routines are. So according to Comprehensive Literacy for All, they are shared reading, they are predictable chart writing, independent writing, self-directed reading, and alphabet and phonics instruction. And so we basically took those 5 emergent routines and we bumped them out a little bit, partly because for reasons that are good and real and play-based. So one of the things that we bumped out was we provide these puppet shows. And so you're going to alternate your days where you're doing learning letters and puppet shows. And that's sort of a brand signature of Building Wings, is that Don, as somebody who didn't learn to read till 9th grade, really understands the role that background knowledge plays in later reading with comprehension. And so these puppet shows are very visual. They introduce vocabulary, they help kids build schema. Another of the routines that we built out is a morning message, because it's a friendly, welcoming, and easy way to sort of introduce your day in a print-based way. And then the last thing, of course, is our play-based activity centers, because we kind of know that those things can and should be happening in early age classrooms anyway. So we saw an opportunity to sort of extend that thematic learning. So the nice thing about this wheel of comprehensive literacy instruction is that, so Karen has prescribed this comprehensive routine for a long time. And a few years ago, we'd say, well, if you're not sure where to start with shared reading. And so a lot of teachers wound up starting with shared reading, and we provide the prompts in our teacher guides, and, quickly people can get up to speed, and that's great. But what Karen's research also showed us that people were only doing shared reading. And so that's not comprehensive literacy instruction. So our prescription is that you start each day with a morning message, and you go as far as you can in this cycle, and then you stop. And then the next day you pick up and you start your day with a morning message, and wherever you left off, you pick up again. So let's imagine I'm in the topic animal homes. And so I did my learning letters, and we read we're going to read that book 5 times for 5 different purposes, but we're shared reading. And then there's a fire drill. So that's that for the day. Everyone's kind of freaked out. So the next day, I'm going to start with a morning message, and I'm going to do some predictable chart writing that's based on the topic of the book. And maybe there's some time for independent writing. And then maybe that's as far as I get. And you're just going to cycle through this 5 times for each of the books to build that repetition, but also that variety. And so, this suggested play centers, maybe some teachers wouldn't do them, maybe most would, but you can sort of insert them or have them in the background of your day at whatever interval feels right to you. Another thing I want to talk about, going back to that ability-disability triangle, is engagement, right? One of the things we know to be true is that if we have our kids interested in what we're doing, we're on second base. And so I go back to a period of time when I was an aide in a classroom, and the child I was supporting had the diagnosis of autism. And there was just no way we had the hope of getting her to sit at circle time during our read aloud. And so one of the things I did was, she was a really good artist and she loved the Pokemon characters. So I shrunk those little characters and I started pasting them into books. And so I'd read an alphabet book, and when I got to that character, I'd say its name, and suddenly I had someone over my shoulder, and soon I had somebody sitting in my lap. And before long, we went to Tar Heel and we looked for the Pikachu books. And then, this is how we don't want this child reading Pikachu forever, but we needed to turn that key. So that was that book disabled thing. So we got her interested and engaged in reading. And from there, we kind of took off. And so I can't say enough about engagement. And so, I showed you this wheel before, and this is just a still from one of our puppet shows. And so one of the things we know to be true is that puppetry is an evidence-based practice in early childhood that builds social skills, communication skills, and also just kind of schema. And I also want to say that both of these elements, we built this sort of wheel out of the Head Start framework, so that we kind of asked ourselves before we developed Readtopia Go, what is it we want to teach? Like, besides building that literacy foundation, what's that knowledge foundation? And so that's how this is the whole of the topics that will get you where you want to go. But the other important thing is that, whether you're following the instructional cycles through the wheel or watching the puppet show, the formats are the same. So for example, in the puppet show, Gertrude, our Readtopia Go star, has a question that she wants answered. Right. And so what do you do when you don't know something? You ask a question. And so they sing about that. And then Gertrude asks a specific question related to the theme. And then one of her friends comes in and sings a song and helps answer it. And that's sort of how we make learning sticky. If you think about Elmo's World or Blue's Clues, they kind of follow the same format, but what changes is the content. And so knowing that this is an evidence-based practice, we wanted to integrate that into our into our approach. And so whether we're sort of casting the wide net with the Head Start framework, but following the same routine, or introducing all the vocabulary and concepts with Gertrude and the puppet show, we sort of have this kind of holding this whole world together. And then perhaps one of the things I'm most proud of is that Readtopia Go each year is going to come with these 36 T3 books. So that's our shared reading level, which also has versions of the books that are adapted back for kids who may have some very, very beginning reading skills. So you're going to get 96 books a year times 4 years. We also make recommendations for you to connect these thematic topics to the books you might already have in your school library or classroom. So, right. So we make these recommendations so you can make those connections and use your school or town library to support that learning. But even more important than that, we read the research about providing mirrors and windows for kids, helping them not only see themselves, but learn about others in the world. And so I don't think there's any other product on the market where you're going to see kids using devices or see kids with limb differences or in different socioeconomic circumstances. And so we really tried to sort of like live out this be it to see it approach so that, so that all kids can see themselves in the libraries. And so, across these 96 books from year 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, you're going to get an incredible amount of books that not only are going to reflect the structures that we know emergent readers like and are successful with, but also are going to be those mirrors and windows for those kiddos. And then what about getting started? Did you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a really good question. Somebody wants to know, how does the curriculum align with the science of reading? Because a lot of states have that requirement in the curriculum to be assigned to the SOR, even for early childhood.
Yeah. So I would say that the way that it aligns to the science of reading is through our Learning Letters and Learning Letters Plus component, where we're sort of having this sequential, systematic, and cyclical approach for teaching both alphabet and sound. We have a scope and sequence that can tell you not only what you're teaching, but when you're teaching it and how your teaching grows. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Go ahead.
No, I think so. I'll let you know if you have more questions.
Okay. So all of this sounds great, but yet plunging into any new sort of thinking is hard. So what about getting started? And so, one of the things that really struck me when I looked at Readtopia from when I was not on the team was what an incredibly dedicated and integrity that the team brought to implementation supports. And so we tried to do that with Readtopia Go. And so we have sort of 3 layers of support, right? So the first one is that how do most of us learn new things these days? We go to YouTube, right? We watch snippets of videos in 2, 3, 4 minutes. And so we have these teaching tutorials that are going to tell you in 2 minutes the what of each routine and the why and how. And so that's the first layer of support. So literally, we don't recommend it, but I could be rolling into the classroom at 8 o'clock in the morning. I could watch my videos and build an orientation for what I'm supposed to be doing. So that's the first layer, right? And we have another couple of layers, which I'll talk you through. So on the left, you'll see a video of one of those teacher tutorials. Again, they're 2 minutes, about 2 minutes, and they're in 2 parts. So if you want to know, why do we do predictable chart writing? Why so much emphasis on this? We're going to tell you what it is and why we do it, and then we're going to tell you how to do it. But if that's not enough, we also provide these say and do teacher guides. And so they will literally kind of take you through in sort of brief but scripted ways. Say this, do this, say this, do this. We give you examples. Here's what a morning message might look like. Here's what your shared reading prompts could be, right? And then the last thing is that, our goal is to sort of help you elevate your practice so that you can operationalize this approach to literacy instruction. So whether or not you're using Readtopia Go or another, that these are the routines that are going to drive outcomes for our kids. But we also provided, you can see in a little Post-it note, those dynamic tips, and those tips sort of keep it fresh. So you may be doing morning message every morning. You don't necessarily need to read through all that because you've already got it, but the tips are going to kind of keep your ideas sparking and find new and innovative ways to keep sort of digging in. And all of this is what's going to lead to Monday morning success, right? And so engaging our kids, providing that time, developing that access, and then last but not least, providing that implementation support. And finally, I just want to say that, at the end of each of those tutorials, there's a link to Project Core, and there's also a script to those teaching tutorials. So you can develop professional learning communities around the videos or the scripts. You can take a deeper dive into Project Core where there's more lengthier models for you to do it. And so there's just tons of opportunities. I have experience doing this work for a long time, and I know that just providing fun and engaging books isn't going to do it. Just providing all the materials isn't even going to do it. We need to sort of walk you through the how. And so that's really what we tried to do. We wanted to save you time. We wanted to elevate your practice. And most importantly, we wanted to build that foundation for our emergent kiddos. And so it's all the books, the activities, the puppets, the plans that you need to get going Monday morning. And I would say I'm finishing up a little early, so if there's time for questions, that works. But I would say that I would just say that, the most important thing I hope that you take out of this is that let's move out of the teach test, and let's understand, let's embrace language and literacy as, sort of two flowers that we can plant with the same seed, and know that when we treat our kids like readers and writers, we're most likely to build them. And so stay tuned, because Readtopia is really recently off the ground and it's growing and building all the time. And so there's always more news, but it's been a pleasure to speak to the AAC and the cloud community. And my email is here. If you would like to ask me any questions, or I can refer you to our implementation specialist, or that's it. So I think that's my spiel for today. And I'm a couple minutes early.
Got a comment here that says, I have a team piloting this program and they love it.
Yeah.
Seasoned educator and a new educator are both finding it powerful.
Awesome.
So that's awesome. We're trying to, does anybody else have more questions that you want to ask, or any comments?
And if not, I can make a couple of more comments about the science of reading if needed.
I don't know, Bethany, if she answered your,
okay,
if you need more information on that, but that would be helpful, ways that people can go about getting it. We always know that any funding things, we need a lot of information when people are asking for it from their districts and things. So
yeah,
anything like that would be helpful.
I think one thing that people can do is go to the website and check it out. There's a really cool carousel, so you can see all the content you'll be teaching in the first year, and that's just the start. There's also the white paper that makes it available, so you can see that you're aligning to this sort of like comprehensive literacy approach. I think the other thing to just pay attention to is that the science of reading predominantly applies to conventional kiddos. And so while, and that the science of reading, I think asks us to sort of draw a circle around alphabet and phonics as important, but we know from lots of experience that we can't privilege just that domain of literacy instructional learning for our kids, because it's not going to work, right? I like to think of readers and writers as jugglers, right? And so you only become a good reader or writer when you encounter something that's unknown or new, and you have a solution to problem solve it. So if we only teach kids alphabet and phonics, but don't support their opportunities to learn about print and don't support their language opportunities and don't give them opportunity, if we only do that, we're not going to be able to get all those balls up in the air at one time. So we absolutely embrace the idea that alphabet and phonics is a critical component to literacy instruction. And we also say, the claim from the science of reading community is that sequential and systematic support in phonics is going to address the needs of 95% of the strugglers. We often support the other guys too. So that's how we think about it.
So, yeah, if you had any more on the science of reading, I think that may have answered it, but if you have anything else there, I typically find that when people are trying to get things funded, a lot of the people that they have to request it from don't care that it's in this special ed or anything like that. They're checking off a box.
Yeah.
So any way that we can do that is great. But
so
Bethany says thanks for that explanation. So I believe that helps.
The other thing I'd say is that we have kind of layers of scope and sequence for the product that are in development and will be available soon. So if you can reach out to me or contact the website, there's a bot on the website that will connect you. We can give you more information so you can help your administrators check those boxes.
Awesome. It's always a fun hurdle to get over.
Yeah, it's a real thing and it's important, and
I don't believe we have any more questions, but if anybody wants to, Maureen's got her email there. mdonnelly@buildingwings.com. So feel free to reach out directly to her, and she'll be happy to answer any more questions. But we appreciate you taking part in AAC in the Cloud. And thanks everyone for joining.